Okay, welcome to webinar number 7, Israel and the Jewish Spirit. For some, this is a politically charged topic, but the Chai Mitzvah materials focus on the spiritual, not the politics. And what this means is that when you do Chai Mitzvah, you're looking for how you relate to the topic and what it means to your spirit. So the conversations can go wherever they're going to go, but you're looking for, or people will be talking about what this means to them. Right now, it's a really politically charged time, and there's bound to be some emotions here. I saw on the J Post last week an article, and this was the headline was "California Students Victorious in Battle Against Campus Discrimination," and then the subtitle was, "As part of the settlement, San Francisco State University agreed to issue a statement affirming that it understands that for many Jews, Zionism is an important part of their identity." So that pretty much focuses exactly on what we're talking about and shows how our current times might make this a pretty charged topic. So it's up to you leading your group where you're going to have the conversation go. And later on in the webinar, I have a suggestion for activities that might help. So I always start out with the same thing. If anybody wants to share something that's happened last month, and join our Facebook group, because we have some interesting things going on there, some articles that are posted and some questions. But I'm going to start with the themes from this topic. First of all, Israel is the Jewish homeland. There's a biblical connection between Jewish people and the land of Israel. Like Abraham in Genesis, throughout history, Jewish people have come from all over the world to find sanctuary in Israel. The relationship between individual Jewish people and their homeland is complex. What role does Israel play in the identity of Jews living outside of Israel? What's the role of diaspora Jews in relation to the modern state of Israel? And has Israel made it possible for Jewish people to fit into the contemporary world with pride? So, actually, I'm going to go back. Your group will compare. Your group will compare the sources coming up and find personal meaning in them through these themes. The first thing we looked at is Israel's not just a place. So it said that Judaism is comprised of 3 core ideas: God, Torah, and the land of Israel. Because the 3 are intertwined, there's a spiritual connection between the land of Israel and the Jewish soul. The texts that you see on the screen highlight this connection. They come from different periods in Jewish history, and they tell of different relationships with Israel. So you can see, look for the 3 core ideas in each one. And when your group discusses it, you'll already have seen these core ideas. The first 2 texts you see here are from Genesis. "And the Eternal said to Abraham, 'Go forth from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house to the land that I will show you.' And the Eternal appeared to Abram and said, 'To your seed I will give this land.' And there he built an altar to the Eternal who had appeared to him." The next comes from Psalms. "If I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its strength." And the third one is more contemporary. It's from Theodore Herzl. "It is true that we aspire to our ancient land, but we want in that ancient land is a new blossoming of the Jewish spirit." So you can see the 3 core ideas in each one, and your group might compare the sources to each other and talk about how they express Israel's place in Jewish spirituality. And then it's interesting to see, do these sources express your relationship to Israel? Do they inform your view of Israel and world politics? So what does that actually mean? By the way, Annette, just jump in anytime if you like. To me, I mean, there are people not many Jewish people, and probably not anybody on this webinar, but, people who have to somehow prove the Jewish connection to the state of Israel and to our history. And so if these ideas inform your politics, then you're a person who says that Israel is our ancient homeland. As far as your spirituality, it's very connected to God and to the Torah. And I think this is something that would be interesting to talk about with your participants. Anything that you want to chime in or in any way join?
No, not right now. I'm just listening. Thank you.
Feel free anytime.
Okay.
Okay. So the next text that we're going to look at, it's called What's in a Name? Israel, the Jewish Homeland. And this is interesting. Israel's not just a physical location, it's the Jewish homeland. And as we read this text, we can think about how Jacob's struggle foreshadows the struggle of the Jewish people. Jacob prevails, and the angel blesses Jacob by changing his name to Israel. So in Jacob's wrestling match with the angel, he symbolically wrestles with his personal challenges and overcomes them. And this, when he changes from Jacob to Israel, when his name is changed, it underscores his newfound ability to face personal challenges head on and find comfort. And to me, this parallels our relationship to the land of Israel. After centuries of struggle, the Jewish people can find refuge and comfort in the modern state of Israel. So I'm going to read the text. The angel saw that he could not prevail against Jacob. And the angel said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you have blessed me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have commanding power with an angel of God and with man, and you have prevailed." So an interesting video that I came across that sheds light on a slightly different way of looking at this topic. It's a Bim Bam video called "Who Did Jacob Actually Wrestle?" I don't know if you've seen it, but it's kind of edgy. I recommend it to our teen program, but you might want to look at it also. I'll send a link when I send my follow-up email. It suggests that Jacob might not have been wrestling with an angel, but with his brother Esau. And whether you like the suggestion or not, the outcome either way is that Jacob becomes a wiser person as an outcome of the struggle. And the conversation that follows has to do with personal struggles as a way to connect with that theme. So it's, we can talk about our own personal struggles, and we can talk about the struggle of the Jewish people and how they both led to Israel. And there's a nice activity you can do also. To be a member of the people of Israel has always been a struggle. Sometimes it struggles with God, sometimes with fellow human beings, sometimes with ourselves, striving to do what's right. Which of these struggles resonate with you? It's a good discussion. And how do they influence your views about the state of Israel? Think about your own personal challenges. Do you have a place, either physical or spiritual, where you find refuge? How does this inform your ideas about the Jewish people and the state of Israel? And you can see here that there's a Mizrach in the corner. Mizrach, as you probably know, means east. And a nice activity you can do is make a simple Mizrach. Many families hang a Mizrach on the eastern wall of their homes to remind them of where Jerusalem is. So your group members could just take an index card and write Mizrach on it. And they can keep it flat for hanging, or they can fold it in half. And they can also put an inspirational quote either on it or inside it. And they can put it in the eastern wall of their house, or in like a spot they find to be of comfort in their home. There's another thing also called a shiviti. I have one right here. And if you're doing the Musar program, it's similar to a Mizrach. You put it on your eastern wall. Since I live on a boat, you never know which is my eastern wall, but east is over here actually at the present time. But it focuses you on God. So you can put this in a place where you want to go to sit quietly and meditate. Either this or a Mizrach is a nice thing to do as like a take home to kind of keep the topic alive throughout the time when the people go home and they're thinking about what they did that day. So that could be a kind of a nice thing to do. And the next topic, which is kind of relates to this also, it's Israel and the Jewish people, degrees of attachment. And we definitely have differing degrees of attachment depending on where we grew up, what generation we are. And you'll see as we read this, Justice Louis Brandeis said, Israel finds in it for the Jews a reason to raise their heads and taking their stand upon the past to gaze straightforwardly into the future. So keep this in mind as we look at the next text. I'm going to give you a little more background. Jews have lived in the land of Israel continuously for more than 3,000 years. Although we weren't always in political control, we weren't always the majority of the population, but we were there. And Jews not living in Israel are said to be living in diaspora. It's a nice little fun fact. The word diaspora comes from the Greek word diasporin, which means disperse. Dia means across, and spirin means scatter. So the Jewish diaspora is often said to have begun in 586 BCE, when the kingdom of Judea was conquered by the Babylonians, who destroyed the ancient temple in Jerusalem and exiled the Jewish population. And ever since, significant numbers of Jews have lived outside the land of Israel. And even throughout history, many have expressed deep longing to return to the Jewish homeland. We're going to look at some of those texts, but we're also going to remember that even though this is true, beginning with a portion of the Judeans who in 538 BCE were permitted to return into Israel, many chose not to. Many chose to remain in Babylon, and some Jews in exile throughout history have chosen to remain in foreign lands, which is indicative of the complicated relationship that we have with Israel. And today the relationship is still complex. The text for this session discussed the multifaceted relationship of diaspora Jews to Israel and the countries where we live. So the text range from My Heart is in the East by Yehuda Halevi, the 12th century physician, poet, and philosopher, to a text by Alan D. Hoffman from a work called Israel in My Mind, Israel's Role in Jewish Identity. So part of this discussion is deeply personal, but it can also become political, so we need to recognize that it's important to be open to everybody's ideas and everybody's feelings. So here are some of the discussion questions. Yehuda Halevi felt greater allegiance to the land of Israel, which at the time that he wrote this poem he had never visited, than to his home country of Spain. And there are a lot of reasons we can look at for that. Maybe Jews weren't so welcome in Spain, and there could be other reasons, but it's interesting to compare that to how we feel and whether we feel more attached to Israel, whether we've been to Israel, whether that changes how we feel about it. As a diaspora Jew, do you see Israel as your homeland? Do you feel more allegiance to the state of Israel or to the country in which you live? And you know what just happened with Omar accusing Jews of not being loyal to the United States is a really current and interesting topic. Alan D. Hoffman states that the new generation of Jews has a different attachment to Israel than previous generations due to a weakening in the collective dimension of Jewish identity and increasing globalization. So do you agree with this? You and I are about the same age, so we might not see this through our, we haven't been maybe as global as our kids, but I know that my kids WhatsApp with people all over the world and they don't even think of borders the way we might.
Well, I think also, we grew up, I was born 5 years after the Holocaust. So Israel had a totally different meaning to us than it does to kids today, younger kids, 20,
Yeah.
even 30s. And I think, after what's been going on, especially with the Women's March, even here in Indianapolis, there was a lot of Jewish and Israel bashing at our Women's March. Yeah, I didn't go. It was really bad. But, the way I think of Israel is more of a, I'm trying to think of the word, I'm on these pain pills. The idea of it, not the actual country itself. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to Israeli politics. It's very difficult. So to me, it's more the concept.
Right.
And what it represents to Jewish people. It's almost like a cushion. We kind of think it's there, we support it, we don't have to live there, but at least it's there for us if, God forbid, something happens. And I think, for someone from my generation or our generation, maybe that's how a lot of us think. But, younger people, they're just bashing and talking about apartheid. And it's just really kind of scary.
Yeah, it's scary what goes on in college campuses, and it's interesting to see, um, like kids, because in college there's a lot of liberal, like, in quotes,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's very much. It's funny because that used to be pro-Israel and now it's anti-Israel.
right,
And the
exactly.
other thing is we have such a very weird sense of history. It's not what you know, it's what you think you know.
Yeah,
People like don't see the connections because no one's taught them the connections.
right.
And there's no so it's a very interesting thing. I think also as anti-Semitism becomes more apparent, our kids become more attached to Israel because they realize that they might need it. I mean, so many French people have left and gone to Israel.
Mhm.
Where I live, we have a lot of Israelis living here. A lot of this, like so many. I don't know why, but we do. And we were out sailing with someone yesterday. They took their boat out, and he had an American flag there. And we said, "Hey, Yossi, why don't you fly an Israeli flag?"
Mhm.
He said, "I don't think I want to make it that obvious. Like, I don't need to attract that." So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I understand that because I'm 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 very much here in Indianapolis. I'm very much involved with the LGBT movement. My son is gay. I'm a very active member of PFLAG, if you know what that
I
is.
don't know what that is.
It's a parent organization. Actually, was founded by a Jewish woman,
Let's
um,
see.
like 40 something years ago in New York City. Um, so we have a lot of issues here in Indiana. We can't even get a hate crimes bill passed. We're one of 5 states without a hate crimes bill. So, I've come in contact with people from the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm having a hard time with them because, of where they stand. And what I find, I don't like arguing. So I just tend to be really careful what I post on Facebook, what I bring up to discuss, because I just don't want to get into it with people. And I told someone from the Black Lives Matter movement like a year or so ago. I said I don't really understand Israeli politics, but I react to this stuff on an emotional level. When somebody says something negative about Israel, I mean, I understand people have the right to do that, but when it goes over into anti-Semitism, it's really hard, and people don't put themselves in your shoes. They don't understand what. I remember years ago when I was working in the Bronx. I was just married, and I had an argument with this young Black woman because she was trying to tell me that slavery was worse than the Holocaust. And I said, this isn't a contest.
That's a very good answer.
I mean, what, you have it worse than me? Compare it. Give me a break.
Right? Neither is good. And you're
Crazy.
right. It's interesting because I think that, first of all, taking Zionism out of the picture, you really can't separate anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism.
No.
People who do that, and of course, every country, I don't follow Israeli politics as closely either. I'm not sure that even if we did, that would make a difference in our emotional attachment to Israel, because every country has stuff that goes on. And it's not a matter of it. You can have opinions of what should happen. For Israel, I've always felt that since I'm not living there, maybe my opinion of who they should elect is not quite as valid. You know,
Exactly.
um, but yeah, I think you can have an attachment to Israel without agreeing with everything the government does. And I've noticed that the people who are critical are much more vocal than the people who are not critical. And I've seen that in Jewish conferences where you have people on both sides, and the
Mhm.
ones who are pro sit quietly and try not to be controversial, while the ones who are con are just talking.
Yeah.
So, and since this webinar is kind of to help us, have a good Chai Mitzvah session, I think in general, usually because of the way the Chai Mitzvah groups form, you might have a lot of people with similar opinions. But if you don't, it's really important for everyone to be heard. And I think what I might do if I found that one side was much more vocal than the other, I would say, we really all deserve to be heard,
Yeah.
and try to listen without prejudice to, the other
And
person.
I think another thing that, non-Jewish people don't understand when they do the criticizing of Israel is that, I mean, the attachment to Israel is built into our prayers. It's not just opening up the newspaper. It's, like I said before, it's a very emotional um, feeling.
It's spiritual.
Right. Oddly enough, I read a lot of Irish history. I love Irish history. I'm totally obsessed with it. And, growing up in the Bronx, I think there were more Irish people in America than there were in Ireland, mostly, especially after the famine.
Right.
If you read their history, there's a lot of parallels between Irish and Jewish history, the persecution. But there are people who've never been there, but they still feel that attachment.
Right. And that's what we were saying about Yehuda Halevi here. And I think at this point, most Jewish people I know have been there, but many of them haven't. And
My
they
husband hasn't. I went with Hadassah, uh, let's see, 17 years ago. No,
Mhm.
15. And I wanted to go back with him. And that's on our bucket list
That's a
because
good one. Yeah.
I think it's really important.
I do too. I do too. It is. So that's going to be a very interesting conversation, I think. And what role do diaspora Jews play in Israeli culture and politics? Well, there's a lot of, that's become much bigger even today than it was 5 years ago. This has become like a big deal.
I
And
have to tell you real quick, I'm watching, since I'm laid up in bed, I've been watching Shtisel.
yes, oh, we just finished it.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
So good. Where are you up to?
I'm on the second season. He's going to marry, the father is going to, Shulam is going to marry that lady. I forget
Yeah.
it's the name.
Menucha.
Malucha, yeah.
Yeah.
But I just, it's such a funny show.
It's
And I
great.
try to explain to people because they think, oh, it's a documentary or it's going to be depressing.
Yeah.
But, these people are just people.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think it gives a whole different view of that segment of Israeli culture, which I think we really need to do. It's good. Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful. I don't know how good your Hebrew is. I've been watching another one that's a comedy.
I don't know any Hebrew, really.
But there's another show, Hashoter HaTov, The Good Cop. It's a comedy. I would tell you, when you finish watching Shtisel, if you want something else Israeli to watch, even if you just watch the credits, it's hysterical. It's very fun. Okay. So, and that actually, strangely enough, brings us to the next topic, because it's about Israel, a positive view of Israel, which is kind of what we're talking about with the TV shows. So if we go back to what Louis Brandeis said about our ancient homeland, but being modern, Israel finds in it for the Jews a reason to raise our heads and, taking their stand upon the past, to gaze straightforwardly into the future. It's interesting, too, what we were talking about. So we'll look at these texts, but they very much focus on the Israeli attitude today and the way the world sees Israel, which is technology, innovative, a big economy. And I think in some ways that has made people less sympathetic towards Israel, because it looks like we can stand on our own 2 feet. But it's interesting to look at it about like the spirit, the foundation of Israel was kind of an entrepreneurial project.
Yeah.
Halutzim, who came to build, they took great risk. They lacked natural resources. It was dangerous from their hostile neighbors, but they were determined and creative. And that is the perfect foundation of a culture that's going to encourage cutting edge creative technology. And again, the Jewish mission has always been about tikkun olam, making the world a better place, being a light unto the nations. And to that end, Israelis work hard to improve the quality of life for people all over the world. And we don't get credit for it a lot of times, but we do. There are innovations in medicine, renewable energy, agricultural innovation. So, there are certainly some people both in Israel and the diaspora who don't agree with everything that goes on in Israel. People discuss this. But without being political, examining the culture of Israel and, like you were saying, how it relates to our spirit is going to be a good focus for this session. And so we're going to look at these things. And it's possible participants might or might not find this inspirational. I found it very inspirational. There are inspirational texts that you can put actually on that Mizrach we were talking about if your group does that. Let's see if I can see them. I, the Eternal, have called you in righteousness, and will hold your hand, and will keep you, and give you for a covenant of the people, for a light unto the nations. So it's got covenant in it and a light unto the nations in it. This is something we're going to talk about. But then, the foundation of Israel, if you will it, it's no dream. Theodore Herzl. And David Ben-Gurion said, in Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles.
That's a great quote.
A great quote. And it's so true of the spirit of Israel. Mm-hmm. Zionism is not only about the prosperity of the people in Israel, but also Jewish people bringing more prosperity to the world. And this was said by the managing director of Google for Israel, South Africa, and Greece. His name is Meir Brand.
Wow.
Very interesting. So that's very, very current. And then the next text that I'm going to show you, it also relates to the same conversation. There's one that I didn't put on the screen here from Isaiah, the one we said before about being a light unto the nations. And the other one that you see on the screen, it's long, but it basically says that the idea of humanity being able to enter into a covenant with God is like the foundation for democracy. So a lot of ideas about democracy have actually come from Jewish from Jewish values. As you know, having a covenant, it's not exactly like a contract. It is you do something, the other person does something, but a covenant is a little different in that both parties are working together towards a goal that's even higher than just helping each other. And that's definitely a Jewish foundation. Jewish values are grounded on and derived from the idea of covenant, which in itself embodies a basic value. The idea that humans establish institutions and relationships on grounds of a fundamental equality based upon freely choosing to do so. So to do that with God is pretty interesting. The covenant idea has been the central value promoting human freedom and equality. I'm just reading the bold because it's long.
Yeah.
If it did not make men the equal of God, it made them equally responsible for the tasks embodied in the covenant, which is a very interesting thought. And the Musar texts for this month talk a lot about the conflict between believing God's going to take care of you and believing you have to help yourself, and how those can both work together. And that's what this text is about also. And you might talk about how do core Jewish values make up the foundation of the modern Jewish state? How do these values apply in terms of democracy, freedom, equality, responsibility, tikkun olam? How have these ideas shaped the rest of the world? And why do you think, so I put the text from Isaiah in both sections. So the reason is for that there's covenant idea in there and the light unto the nations in there. Mm-hmm. That we are responsible, and we, in two ways, we're responsible to make it happen and responsible to be a good example.
So can I ask you a question? What does it mean here when it says the self-limitation of God?
Let's see where that is.
Where you have it, yeah, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So while the original biblical covenants were between man and God, the very idea itself that the two could be joined in covenant was radical, as you know, thinking that we could actually enter a covenant with God.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and it involved the limitation, in biblical terms, of the self-limitation of God by entering into a covenant with humans. You know what I mean? Like it was, God said, I'm going to enter a covenant with you. I'm not just going to be in charge. You've got responsibility too. So God kind of limited God's self and said, you're going to have some responsibility here. God
That's
clearly,
not a very Christian thing, is it?
and no, I think,
Idea.
yeah, no, later the Reformed Protestants, the Puritans recognized the daring equality of this claim, and democracy has some basis in this. But yeah, we Jewish people are very responsible. We're not just waiting for someone to save us. And the joke about the two rowboats in the airplane?
No.
So there was a big flood, and the guy climbs to his roof, and somebody comes by in a rowboat and says, hop in the rowboat, I'll save you. And he says, no, God will save me.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I know the joke.
Right? Two
Yeah.
rowboats and a helicopter, right?
Yeah.
So Jewish people, understand that. That's part of our foundation. That's part of, I think, what makes Israel what it is. And so that brings me to the activity I wanted to talk about, which is how to make your group, if it does have people with varying opinions, how to maybe help this go. And it's been said, if you ask 2 Jews, you get 3 opinions.
Right.
So personal feelings about Israel can be strong. It's important that every group member be heard. So form 2 groups, and they can debate one of the essential questions. Has Israel made it possible for Jewish people to fit into the contemporary world with pride? What role does Israel play in the identity of Jews living outside of Israel? Or what is the role of diaspora Jews in relation to the modern state of Israel? So take one of these questions, and to make sure that each side understands the reasoning of its opponents, after an initial discussion, assign the groups the task of supporting the argument that is counter to their beliefs. So in other words, if members of one group feel that Israel has made it possible for Jewish people to fit into the contemporary world with pride, encourage them to play devil's advocate. Assign them the argument of the opposite viewpoint. Because that's a good way for people to understand each other.
Yeah.
And, it could make it an interesting Chai Mitzvah topic group discussion. And some great supplemental. These are really good. I just looked through them again today. So there's a weekly blog about the wonderful things that are happening in Israel. Very good news, Israel.blogspot. There's some interesting things that we don't hear about anywhere else. So it's interesting to read. Do you want to uplift? Some great Eli talks. Shifting the Paradigm, Student Empowerment in the Startup Nation. Contemporary Israel, A Language of People and Sounds. Timely Issues, Timeless Values. Between Unity and Uniformity, the Many Lenses of Israeli Education. It's very interesting. And then there's one from the Jewish Week by Chai Mitzvah Board President Scott Shea, and that's called It's Not Just About Money, The Honest Truth About Giving to Israel. And it was in the Jewish Week in 2017. It is something that I did not expect when I read it. How the way Jewish organizations invest sometimes supports our enemies. You should really read it. It's very interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then there's this great interactive map of Israel, which is fun. You can just click on it. So if you're recuperating and you need something to read, this is a good one.
Are you and you'll send this to us, right?
I'll send this to you, and I'll have it posted on our website. And when I send out a follow-up email, I'll send you a link to that interesting video and a link to that article about the college students. So if you want to bring that into your group, you can have that there. And then I'm just going to go over the personal reflections. Each source book in the back cover has questions to help focus the participants on the independent project. So you might want to have them write about it or talk about it, at least encourage them to think about what challenges have you experienced while pursuing your independent projects. Do you feel you've been able to overcome these challenges? And that kind of relates to Jacob and Israel. And then another question that relates their personal projects to their personal, to their reflection on Israel. Which of your independent projects do you feel requires the most creative thinking? Because again, that's something that we talked about being in Israel and that we do. So that is that. And I'm so glad you joined me. If you have any questions,
No, I'm just enjoying it.
I'm really glad.
I feel bad that I'm the only one here.
I know there are many people signed up, but they'll watch the recording and they'll get the follow-up email too. So that'll be
I
helpful.
guess maybe people work.
Well, they register when I try to do it at lunchtime for at least the East Coast or early in the morning for the West Coast. So, and you're right in the middle, though. Are you the same time?
Yeah, we're Eastern Standard. So we're on daylight savings time like you are. We
Yeah.
had see, that's another thing here in Indiana. They don't like change. So when I first moved here, we did not have daylight savings time. So even though we were on Eastern time in the summer, it got so screwed up. And then they had this big argument, are we going to go on Eastern or are we going to go on, Midwest because of Chicago, because a lot of people do business with Chicago. So finally they settled on daylight savings time. And then you hear everybody complain. They can't deal with it. And, growing up in New York, this is how we grew up. So what's the big deal?
Exactly. Well, that's a very Bronx thing to say, and it's true. My grandfather, his favorite thing was, "You want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about."
Yeah, my mother used to say that too.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me. I'm really glad you were here.
Thank you.
Great, and I hope you'll join the next one as well.
What is the next one going to be?
It's going to be in about a month. The topic is, I think it's gratitude. I have to think.
Okay. Oh,
really
good.
Good.
That's interesting.
It should be, very much so. I'll send out an email. All right, thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Let's see, how do I